My name is Tom, and I work as a pizza delivery driver at Vito's Pizzeria, a small but popular place that serves some of the best pies in town. It was a typical night in 2009, and I was making one of the last deliveries of the day. The streets were quiet, as usual, but there was something unsettling about that night. The sky was overcast, with no stars in sight, and the moon was hidden behind thick clouds. This delivery was taking me to a rural area on the outskirts of town. I'd made a few deliveries there before, but I always found it challenging to navigate those dark, poorly lit roads. The streetlights were scarce, leaving entire sections of the road shrouded in darkness. I received the address, 1932 Hollow Creek Road. It seemed easy enough, but once I hit the rural road, I realized finding the house would be more complicated than expected. Hollow Creek Road was long and winding, with several turnoffs to other streets and properties, many of which weren't clearly marked. At each turnoff, my GPS would lose signal, only to reconnect and inform me that it was recalculating the route. The pizzeria had an emergency paper map for situations like this, but the car's interior light wasn't enough to decipher the small print and winding lines on the crumpled paper. I tried calling the number on the order, but the cell signal was weak, and the call wouldn't go through. After driving back and forth for about 20 minutes, I started getting frustrated. The clock on the car's dashboard read 10:45 p.m., and I was wasting time. Finally, as I passed by an entrance I almost didn't notice before, I saw a small wooden sign, half hidden by foliage, with the number 1932 painted in peeling white paint. It was a narrow dirt path that was easy to miss, and I realized this was the entrance I was looking for. When I finally found the right path, I felt relieved, but I quickly became uneasy again. At the end of the trail, I approached a small old house that looked almost abandoned. The paint was peeling, and the place had an aura of something that belonged to a completely different era. I soon noticed an orange glow coming from inside the house, as if a fire was burning. It seemed odd, but I thought it might just be an old lamp. This glow, combined with the silhouettes of the surrounding trees, made the scene a bit eerie. As I parked, another detail caught my attention. Soft music played from inside, a melodic and distant sound, like something from an old radio. With the car engine turned off, I recognized that the music was from an era well before mine, possibly the 1930s. The music added an unsettling atmosphere to the already strange setting. I got out of the car with the pizza in hand and walked hesitantly toward the door. The silence of the night, broken only by the music, heightened the feeling of isolation. As I approached, I could see the light flickering in the windows, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Reaching the door, I hesitated for a moment before knocking. As I waited, a chill ran up my spine, as if someone were watching me. That's when I heard footsteps inside the house, heavy and slow, approaching the door. My heart raced, and for a moment I considered going back to the car. But then the door creaked open, revealing a strange man standing in the doorway. He wore old-fashioned clothes and a hat that cast a shadow over part of his face. The most unsettling detail was that only one of his eyes was visible, peering intently from beneath the hat's brim. "Good evening," he said, his voice raspy and drawn out. "Sorry for the delay. Let me grab the money." The man moved away slowly, leaving the door ajar. The music continued playing, and a peculiar smell lingered in the air, something I couldn't immediately identify, but that made me uncomfortable. I stood at the entrance, looking around, trying to catch more details of the interior. The house seemed like a museum of old curiosities. Heavy antique furniture, a phonograph spinning in the corner, and walls covered with yellowed, time-worn wallpaper. Something was definitely off about the place. As I waited, the smell in the air became more pronounced, and then I realized. It was the smell of something rotten, an odor of decay that seemed to emanate from within the house. A chill ran through me, and a primal instinct told me I needed to get out of there. That's when I heard the man call out to someone named Randall in an alarming tone, as if he were nervous or concerned. The man went back inside the house, disappearing into the shadows, while I stood there at the doorway, holding the pizza. I tried to ignore the increasingly strong smell of rot, but it was impossible not to think that something was terribly wrong there. While I waited, I began to feel more and more uneasy. From inside, I heard the man calling out to someone in an urgent tone. "Randall!" His voice carried a sense of urgency, as if he were trying to convey something important. Every mention of the name heightened the tension in the atmosphere. My anxiety grew with each passing second. The music, which once seemed soft and nostalgic, now was just another unsettling element in that bizarre scenario. I looked back, seriously considering returning to the car and getting out of there as fast as possible. Something told me I shouldn't wait to see who or what Randall was. Suddenly, the sound of heavy footsteps coming from the hallway brought me back to reality. I looked towards the sound and saw the man reappearing. But he wasn't alone. For a moment, I thought I saw a shadow moving behind him, but maybe it was just my imagination, exaggerated by fear. The man stopped in the middle of the hallway, again with only one eye visible under the brim of his hat. He didn't say a word, just stood there, staring at me. There was something disturbing about his movements and his inscrutable expression. Everything about him seemed out of the ordinary. My heart beat faster, and my mind was on high alert. I needed to get out of there, but something held me back from just turning my back and running. Then the man finally broke the silence, his voice hoarse and filled with an eerie calm. "Randall's not here right now, but he'll love the pizza. I'll get the money. You'd better wait." That was the last straw. The way he mentioned Randall, as if he was really there and somehow involved, terrified me. I knew I couldn't wait any longer. With the pizza still in hand, I took a step back, retreating from the entrance of the house. Every instinct screamed for me to leave before something worse happened. The man continued to stare at me, but I no longer cared about payment or work rules. Seeing the man standing in the doorway, watching me with that fixed gaze, sent a shiver down my spine. There was no more doubt in my mind. I needed to get out of there as fast as I could. My heart pounded wildly as I backed away from the house, feeling his eyes follow my every move. The sense of imminent danger made me quicken my pace, though I didn't want to make it seem like I was running away. The stench of death seemed to cling to my clothes, and the 1930s music still echoed in my mind like a soundtrack to a horror movie. When I finally reached the car, my hands were trembling so much I could barely hold the keys. I glanced quickly back and saw that the man was still there, now standing at the entrance, with the shadow of the house cast over him. It was as if he was relishing my fear, as though the situation was some kind of sick game to him. I started the engine, the sound of the car echoing down the dirt road. Without wasting time, I shifted into reverse and made a quick maneuver. The car's headlights briefly illuminated the man's face, revealing an expression I couldn't interpret, but that left me even more unsettled. I floored the accelerator, the car skidding slightly on the dirt road before gaining traction and speeding toward the exit of the narrow path. I looked in the rearview mirror, seeing the house gradually disappear among the trees, the orange glow of the windows still visible in the darkness. As I drove away, adrenaline still coursed through my veins, but relief gradually began to wash over me. I was out of danger, but the memory of that house and the strange man would stay with me for a long time. My mind kept replaying the scene, the strange smell, the old music, and that piercing gaze. I tried to rationalize what had happened, but nothing made sense. Who was Randall? And what was really going on in that house? Questions piled up in my mind, but I knew I might never find the answers. When I finally reached a main road, I slowed down and tried to catch my breath. The feeling of safety was starting to return, but the tension was still present. I needed to calm down before heading back to the pizzeria. I picked up my phone to call my boss, ready to tell him what had happened. I knew he would probably think it was all a joke, but I needed to vent, to tell someone about what I had just experienced. As soon as I parked at the pizzeria, I was still trying to process everything that had happened. My mind was a mess of thoughts and images from that strange house. Although the adrenaline had subsided, the sense of alertness was still there, as if danger could be waiting around the next corner. I got out of the car, grabbed the empty thermal bag, and went inside the pizzeria. The familiar environment and the smell of fresh dough brought me a sense of normalcy that I desperately needed at that moment. Some coworkers were at the counter, chatting and laughing, while others were in the back, cleaning up and organizing things for closing. "Hey, Tom. How did the last delivery go?" asked Matt, one of the delivery guys, looking at me with curiosity. I sighed and forced a smile before starting to recount what had happened. "You guys won't believe what happened on the last delivery," I began, trying to keep a casual tone, though my heart was still racing. I told them about the difficulties I had finding the house, the narrow dirt path, the 1930s music playing in the background, and the strange man with the disturbing look. I described the eerie feeling I had when I noticed the smell of death and how he called someone named Randall in an alarming tone. As I narrated the events, the other delivery guys started laughing and making jokes. "Sounds like someone's been watching too many horror movies," said Dave, shaking his head with a smile. "Maybe the guy just wanted a quick dance," joked Sarah, mimicking a funny dance. "Maybe he was just an eccentric old man," suggested Matt, winking at me. Although their jokes and comments were typical of our work environment, I couldn't shake the feeling that something genuinely sinister was happening in that house. Even if they didn't take me seriously, I knew what I had felt, and the memory of that piercing look wouldn't leave my mind. "Maybe I did overreact," I admitted, trying to mask my discomfort with a smile. "But seriously, it was a strange place. I was relieved when I got out of there." As the night went on and we helped close up the pizzeria, my mind was still partially stuck on that experience. No matter how much they laughed or how much I tried to downplay what had happened, the feeling of having narrowly escaped something potentially dangerous wouldn't leave me. Suddenly, my boss, Tony, appeared in the kitchen with a curious expression. "So, Tom, I heard you had an interesting delivery," he commented with a slight smile. "Yeah, it was a bit strange to say the least," I replied, trying not to sound too serious. "Well, stay sharp, kid. Those rural roads can be full of surprises," Tony said, giving me a pat on the shoulder before heading back to the office. As the night went on, everyone started to disperse, and I left the pizzeria still thinking about the mysterious house. As I drove home, I couldn't help but feel grateful for having gotten out of there without any problems. When I finally got home, I felt exhausted, both physically and emotionally. As I lay in bed, the images of the night passed through my mind one last time. I closed my eyes, promising myself that the next time something like this happened, I wouldn't hesitate to trust my instincts and act with more caution. I work as a pizza delivery guy at Pizza Hut in Newark, Delaware. My routine is pretty straightforward. I arrive in the late afternoon, grab my bike, a bunch of orders, and start biking around town. I'm already familiar with the streets, the regular customers, and even the dogs that always bark and chase after me. It was a typical Thursday night, and I was about to end my shift. The cold was getting more intense, making me want to get home even more. The city was quiet, with only the sounds of passing cars and streetlights illuminating the semi-deserted streets. I had completed my last deliveries and was heading back to the pizzeria when my boss, Mike, called me over. "Jake, I need you to make one more delivery before you go," he said, as I tried to hide my disappointment. It was an unexpected order, and I was already mentally at home, lying on the couch watching TV. But Mike had been patient with me in the past, so I didn't want to refuse and cause any trouble. "Where's it going?" I asked, trying not to sound annoyed. Mike gave me the address, and I quickly realized I knew the area well. I had made deliveries there before, and it was usually calm, but something about that night gave me a bad feeling. "It's a bit far, but the tip could be good," Mike said, trying to cheer me up. I knew he was trying to be fair, so I accepted the task, placed the pizza in the thermal bag, hopped on my bike, and headed towards the address. As I pedaled through the city, I started to remember the other times I had delivered in that area. It was a quiet neighborhood, but there was something about those streets that always made me uneasy. Maybe it was the lack of proper lighting or the deep silence that hung there at night. As I got closer to the destination, that feeling of discomfort only grew stronger. I tried to dismiss it as just the accumulated fatigue of the day. The delivery shouldn't take long, and soon I'd be back to the safety of the pizzeria. The street was darker than I remembered. The tall trees cast shadows that stretched across the sidewalk, and the cold wind blew, making the leaves rustle softly. The house was at the end of a dead-end street, making it even more isolated from the rest of the neighborhood. When I turned the corner, I saw the house for the first time. It was dark, with no lights on, which seemed strange for someone who had ordered a pizza. I stood in front of the house for a moment, watching. There didn't seem to be any movement, and for a brief moment I thought I might have written down the wrong address. I tried not to let my imagination run wild. I rode up the driveway and parked my bike, thinking maybe the resident was just upstairs or distracted by something. With the pizza in hand, I walked up to the door and knocked a few times, waiting for someone to answer. As I waited, my discomfort grew. The silence around the house was oppressive, and I felt as if I were being watched, even though there was no one in sight. I rang the doorbell and waited again, but there was no response. I decided to try calling the number on the receipt. I pulled out my phone and dialed, but I only heard the ringtone with no one answering. That's when I noticed something that made me freeze. Across the street, among the bushes, I noticed a dark figure. Someone was there, partially hidden by the shadows, but clearly watching my movements. I pretended not to see anything and continued looking at the house, trying to appear unconcerned while my heart raced faster. I approached the door again, knocking harder this time. The sound echoed through the silent hallway, but there was still no response. I looked back at the shadowy figure that was still there, motionless in the bushes across the street. I picked up my phone and dialed the number on the receipt again. The call rang a few times before going to voicemail. I sighed, feeling the frustration growing. I took a few steps back, looking at the window of the house, hoping to see some sign of life, but the curtains were drawn, and the darkness inside the house was complete. I was about to give up when I heard a noise coming from the bushes. A rustling sound made me turn quickly. The figure I'd noticed before was still there, but now it was moving slowly as if trying to get closer. I couldn't see its face, just the silhouette lurking among the leaves. A chill ran down my spine. Who was this person, and why were they watching me? The scene began to feel more like a horror movie than a simple pizza delivery. Pretending I hadn't noticed anything, I turned back to the door and knocked once more, hoping that the persistence would eventually catch someone's attention inside. Then the door abruptly opened, and I stepped back, surprised. A man appeared, looking annoyed and half asleep, as if I had interrupted something important. "What do you want?" he asked, eyeing the pizza box in my hands. "I have a delivery here for this address," I replied, trying to keep my voice calm. "Did you place an order?" The man frowned, looking from me to the pizza and back again. "I didn't order anything. Must have been my roommate, but he's passed out drunk." The explanation seemed plausible, but it didn't ease my concern about the figure in the bushes. I looked at the receipt once more and then suggested, "Maybe you could sign for him? That way I can complete the delivery." The man hesitated for a moment before shrugging. "Sure, whatever, I'll grab a pen." As he went back inside, I felt again the gaze of the figure from across the street. My heart was racing, and I knew I had to get out of there as quickly as possible. The man returned, quickly signed the receipt, and handed the pen back to me. "There, now you can go," he said, already closing the door. With the delivery finally done, I turned to head back to my bike. The figure in the bushes was closer now, which made my anxiety spike. The scene was unsettling, and the feeling of being watched was unbearable. I got on my bike, trying to appear as natural as possible, but the adrenaline was starting to take over. I knew I needed to get out of that strange place before something happened. However, as I moved away from the house, I noticed that the shadowy figure had stepped out of the bushes and was moving quickly toward me. Panic set in. This was not a normal situation. My heart began to pound and a wave of adrenaline rushed through my body. I couldn't stay there. I needed to get out of that place as fast as possible. I looked around frantically, trying to decide the best escape route. The street I had come from was well lit, but it was long and open, meaning he could catch up with me if he was faster than me. Then I remembered an unlit bike trail that cut through a nearby park and served as a shortcut to the restaurant. Without thinking twice, I jumped on the bike and started pedaling with all my might toward the trail. The path was narrow, and the shadows of the trees stretched out like threatening arms along the track. The cold wind cut across my face as I moved forward, but the urgency of the situation made me ignore any discomfort. The man was getting closer. I could hear his fast footsteps behind me, the sound growing as I struggled to maintain control of the bike on the uneven trail. Each pedal stroke was a battle against the fear consuming me. The trail twisted through the park, and the lack of light made it hard to see, but I was familiar enough with the path to know where the critical points were. I focused on dodging potholes and stones, keeping my focus on escaping the man chasing me. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the trail began to widen, and I could see the light of street lamps ahead, signaling that I was near the end. With one last effort, I shot out of the trail and back onto the main street, where the lights and people gave me a renewed sense of safety. The restaurant was just ahead, I pushed forward to it, stopping only when I was in front of the entrance. Panting, I got off the bike, still looking back, but there was no sign of the man. I had managed to escape. I entered the restaurant, breathless and with my heart still racing. My coworkers gave me curious looks as I leaned against the counter, trying to catch my breath and explain what had just happened. "Are you okay?" asked Sarah, one of the servers, with concern written all over her face. Yeah, I replied, still trying to process the experience. Just a hectic delivery. Tip-top. As I recounted what had happened, I realized my colleagues listened with disbelief, but also a hint of concern. I explained how the man in the bushes had appeared out of nowhere and started following me, and how I barely managed to escape. After finishing the story, one thing was clear in my mind. No matter how much I liked my job, I wasn't willing to take the risk of being followed by sinister figures at night again. With that decision made, I went to the manager and asked to switch my shift to daytime. The incident that night was enough to make me reconsider how much personal safety was worth, more than just a delivery shift. I left the restaurant with a quiet sense of relief, knowing that the experience of almost becoming a victim of something potentially dangerous would stay with me for a while. The streets of Newark, Delaware, might seem quiet, but now I knew that when night fell, what lurked in the shadows wasn't always something worth encountering. And so, with a promise never to make night deliveries again, I left the restaurant that night, grateful to have escaped, but aware that next time, if there was one, I might not be so lucky. I work as a delivery driver for Uber Eats in Austin, Texas. Ever since I finished college, I've been working to pay off student loans that seem endless. The bills keep piling up, and the income just isn't enough, so I can't afford to turn down any job opportunity that comes my way. I generally prefer nighttime deliveries. The pay is better, there's less traffic, and I can get across the city without dealing with congested streets and impatient drivers. I love the sense of freedom when I'm riding my bike through quiet, empty streets, just me, my bike, and the city lights keeping me company. Austin is a vibrant city full of life, but at night, it transforms into something almost magical. The building lights reflect off the asphalt. Shadows stretch across the sidewalks, and the distant sound of music blends with the gentle hum of streetlights. My usual deliveries are in neighborhoods I know well, downtown with its busy streets, residential areas, and the university districts, where students always order food late at night. I know every corner and shortcut, which helps me make deliveries quickly, resulting in more orders and tips. But that night, as I reviewed my last order before ending my shift, I noticed a delivery in an area that was a bit further out. Normally, I wouldn't accept a request to a place I'm not familiar with, but the payout was higher than usual, and I was willing to take on a new route to end the night with a bit more money in my pocket. The order was in a suburb of Austin, a neighborhood I didn't visit often. The street seemed isolated, with few houses and little lighting. Something about the address made me uneasy, but the thought of a good tip motivated me to accept the order. I got my bike ready with the thermal bag and put the address into the GPS. The streets were getting quieter and the night air was crisp, bringing a sense of anticipation. With that mindset, I set off into the unknown, ready to face whatever the night had in store. As I got closer to the delivery house, the streets became narrower and the houses were more spaced out. The streetlights were scarce, leaving long stretches in darkness. My GPS indicated I was close, but something about the area felt off. Finally, I turned onto a narrow street leading to the house. It was a dead-end road with dense trees on either side, making the darkness feel even more oppressive. My only source of light was the bike's headlight, which illuminated the path ahead, revealing the house at the end of the street. The house looked uninhabited. There were no lights on, no cars in the driveway, not even a small decoration to suggest someone lived there. The windows were dark and covered with heavy curtains, and the yard was overgrown with weeds. Something told me this house wasn't a home. Despite my growing discomfort, I needed to try and complete the delivery. I parked my bike on the sidewalk and approached the front door. I rang the doorbell and waited. Nothing. Not a single sound from inside the house. I knocked on the door, trying to hear any movement from the other side. When I got no response, I took out my phone and sent a message through the app to the customer, letting them know I was at the door. To my surprise, the customer responded quickly, confirming that I was at the right address and asking me to leave the order. Despite the confirmation, something didn't feel right. Why wasn't anyone answering? The customer said they preferred a handoff delivery, but the house seemed deserted. That's when I realized there weren't any other houses visible or cars parked on the street, which made me even more uneasy. I glanced at my bike, thinking maybe it was better to give up and head back to the safety of downtown. However, before I could make a decision, I heard a distant sound that seemed to come from outside the house. A soft call, almost a whisper, said, "Here." The voice was low but clear enough to be heard. I looked around, trying to figure out where it was coming from. It didn't seem to come from inside the house, but from somewhere nearby. The sense of impending danger only increased. The voice calling "here" echoed in my mind. What initially seemed like a strange call was now a glaring indication that something was wrong. The silent, dark house, the isolation of the area, everything was starting to fit into a terrifying puzzle. Every second that passed, without someone answering the door, increased my unease. I felt like I was in a setting designed for something I wasn't prepared to face. The trees around the house swayed gently with the wind, but everything seemed to be moving in a threatening manner. I decided it was time to turn back and get out of there as quickly as possible. I walked back to my bike, trying to ignore the growing sense of panic. As I approached, I noticed something that made my stomach turn. The tires were completely flat. The sight of the slashed tires made my heart race. Someone had done this while I was at the door. It was clear I was a target. I looked around frantically, my mind racing with questions I didn't want to answer. Then I heard soft, steady footsteps surrounding me, a nearly imperceptible sound, like someone moving with the intention of not being noticed, but close enough for me to know they were there. And then, the voice, clearer this time, whispered again, "Here." Suddenly, as if appearing out of nowhere, 4 masked men emerged from the shadows, positioning themselves around my bike, blocking all possible escape routes. Panic set in, but I needed to think quickly about what to do next. The men were imposing, dressed in dark clothing that blended with the night. The masks hid their expressions, but their posture spoke volumes. I was in trouble. "Get off the bike," one of them ordered in a cold, firm voice. I looked around desperately, searching for an exit or someone who could help, but the street was deserted as if the entire world had suddenly stopped. Another assailant, with his eyes fixed on me, raised something that looked like a shiny piece of metal, the light reflecting enough for me to realize they were armed. The reality of the situation hit hard, and I knew I had to cooperate. All right, I muttered, raising my hand slowly to show I wasn't a threat. "I'll get off, no problem." As I opened the car door, adrenaline coursed through my veins, and my mind tried to find a way out of that trap. There was no time to think much, just follow what they wanted and hope this wouldn't end even worse. The masked men started moving toward me with a frightening confidence. Each step they took seemed planned, and I knew I had nowhere to run. Panic tried to take over, but I needed to keep my cool. The group's leader, a tall man with a black mask covering his entire face, approached and with a controlled and firm voice said, "Hand over everything you have. Money, phone, wallet, everything." The situation left me with no options. Getting off the bike was the only way to maybe not get hurt even more. My hands trembled as I began to remove the seatbelt, feeling the attacker's gaze weighing heavily on me. "Come on, we don't have all night," shouted another impatiently. With my heart racing, I got off the bike and cautiously took a few steps back, trying not to provoke any unexpected reactions. With slow movements, I handed over my phone and wallet. They rummaged through the bike, grabbing my backpack with the little money I'd made on previous deliveries. I knew that by the end of this, the night could still get worse. When I thought everything would be resolved, one of the men, perhaps dissatisfied with the amount they took, gave me a hard shove. I stumbled backward, trying to regain my balance, but it was no use. "What did you think would happen?" one of them mocked, before landing a punch to my stomach that doubled me over in pain. It was like all the air had been knocked out of my lungs, and the only thing I could do was fall to the ground, struggling to breathe. While I was there, vulnerable, the kicks started. 1, 2, 3, I couldn't even count. All I felt was the impact of the boots and the muffled sound of blows. My vision darkened, and the voices around me became distant, like I was drifting away from everything. "Let's get out of here," said the leader. The voices of the others became a blur, and slowly they disappeared into the darkness, taking everything I had. I was left alone, beaten and abandoned. After what seemed like hours, I opened my eyes, the pain still throbbing in my body. I was lying on the cold ground, looking up at the starry sky, the stars watching me from above, indifferent to what had happened. The reality of the situation hit me hard. I had been beaten and robbed, left to fend for myself in a place that seemed to have swallowed my dignity and safety. It was a moment of pure vulnerability, but I knew I couldn't stay there. I stood up with difficulty, leaning on the bike to steady myself. My head was spinning, and each step was a struggle against the desire to just give up. But I couldn't. Not here. Not now. With determination, I started walking, guided only by the hope of finding some light in the darkness. With my body still aching, I started to walk painfully down the dark street. My legs could barely support me, but I knew I needed to find help. Desperation drove me, and all I could think about was reaching a safe place. I walked for a few minutes until I spotted a house with lights on. It was the only hope I had at that moment. With one last effort, I made my way to the front door, each step a battle against the pain radiating through my entire body. With a trembling hand, I knocked on the door softly at first, fearing to scare the residents. When there was no answer, I knocked harder, and finally, I heard footsteps approaching from the other side. The door opened to reveal a middle-aged woman, her face lighting up with concern as soon as she saw me. "My God, what happened to you?" she asked, her voice full of empathy. "I need help," I managed to respond, my voice almost failing. "I was robbed and beaten. Please help me." Without hesitation, she pulled me inside the house, offering me a seat and quickly grabbing the phone to call the police and paramedics. As I waited, she brought me a glass of water and started asking questions to keep me conscious, trying to understand what had happened. Soon, the sound of sirens filled the air, and the police and paramedics arrived. The officers started asking questions while the paramedics treated my injuries. I told them everything that happened, from the moment I arrived at the house to the attack by the masked men. The police immediately began investigating the case, and one of them explained they needed to check the house where I was assaulted. "It's strange," he said, looking at his notes. "We've received a few calls recently about suspicious activity in that area." A few days later, I was called to the police station for an update on the case. I was surprised to learn that the delivery order had been placed with a phone and wallet stolen from another victim. Everything was orchestrated to look like a legitimate order, but in reality it was a setup. Even more revealing was the discovery that the house where it all happened had been up for sale and vacant for months. The attackers used it as a location for their assaults, taking advantage of the fact that no one regularly monitored it. The details were disturbing, and I felt deceived by something that seemed so common and routine. I was just doing my job, and they took advantage of that in such a cruel way. In the days that followed, I reflected on the experience and the lessons it taught me. I decided I needed to change some things in my life. The first decision was to stop making deliveries at night, at least until I felt safe again. My safety and well-being were more important than any extra pay. I talked to my boss, explaining the situation and asking to switch my shifts to daytime. Fortunately, he was understanding and helped me reorganize my schedule. Over time, I began to feel more secure and regain confidence. But the experience of that night never stopped haunting me. The memories of what happened were a constant reminder that personal safety should not be taken for granted, and that sometimes even the most ordinary situations can become dangerous. What happened to me changed my perspective on work and life in general. I learned to be more cautious, trust my instincts, and above all, value my safety above anything else. The experience was painful, but it taught me a valuable lesson that I will carry with me for the rest of my life.